Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the GEO Virtual Symposium. Our session today will tackle a topic that is relevant across the GEO work program, and that is resource mobilization and sustainable funding. As it's the final day here of the GEO Symposium, I would just like to thank everybody who has joined us throughout the week. There's been some great presentations and lively discussions. I also appreciate everyone tweeting and using the event hashtag EO4Impact. It's been great to see all the conversations happening on Twitter, so thank you for that. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Theodora Mills, and I'm the Communications Officer here at the GEO Secretariat, where I lead the social media. I lead the communications outreach for GEO, and in addition to this role, I've been working on resource mobilization with Justina Niczynska and Stephen Ramage, and the three of us make up the GEO RM team. I've also been on the budget working group, working on the GEO Trust Fund, and I've also been leading a group of students from the Graduate Institute of Geneva who are writing their master's thesis on sustainable funding, and their case study is GEO. So in addition to this communications work, this very important fundraising work is at the heart of some of my work here. And so I'm really happy to put today's session together. We have a great lineup for you. You'll hear stories from across the GEO work program, focused on their fundraising challenges, their successes, funders that they have been able to approach effectively. And this is really an advice-driven session. And I hope that the GEO work program leads can really benefit from the discussions today. So with that, I would like to give a brief overview of who you will meet and who you will hear presenting today. My colleague, Justina Niczynska from NOAA, will give a really good overview of how GEO is trying to engage more effectively through strategy and our approaches. And then we'll hear from Ian how GeoGlam has been effective in their collaboration with countries and what their funding needs are looking forward. We have Amos Kaboba, who will talk about the GEO land degradation neutrality and their fundraising journey. Next, Pierre-Yves Letron from Mercator Ocean will talk about how GEO Blue Planet has been effectively engaging European resources. Then we'll turn to Harsh from the World Bank. He's been working closely with GeoGlows, partnering on global models. So he'll talk a little bit about the role of technology and some of the innovative ways that they're approaching funding. And then we'll turn to Adam Lewis from Digital Earth Africa. They have quite a good success story to share. They've been effective in raising money for their continental open data products. So we'll hear a little bit from him. So these will be a good overview of what's going on in the GEO work program. And then I'm really happy to say we've invited an external expert, Casper Edmonds from the International Labour Organization, and he's going to talk a bit more broadly about some of the funding challenges in relation to international organizations and sustainable development agendas. So I hope that you're ready for some great presentations. Just a few more logistics. On our symposium webpage, we've put a link to an interactive poll because we'd like to hear from you what your fundraising challenges have been and some of your takeaways from this session. So if you go to the session page afterwards, please complete that poll. To pose your questions for the session, it's been the same throughout the week. Get onto Slido, use the hashtag GEO, and we will put your questions to the presenters. And of course, follow us on Twitter, use the hashtag EO4Impact, and don't forget to like the YouTube channel that you're watching now. And that way you'll be the first to know when we have new videos up. So with that, I just want to say thanks again for your participation, and let's get started. So let's go to our first presenter, which is Justina Niczynska.
Good afternoon. My name is Justina Niczynska. I am based in the U.S. at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and I am speaking to you today in my role on the GEO Resource Mobilization team. In addition to myself, the GEO Resource Mobilization team includes Stephen Ramage, GEO's External Relations Director, and Tia Mills, GEO's Communications Officer. The goal of this presentation is to provide you with an overview of the GEO Resource Mobilization strategy. As was mentioned in the introduction, GEO as an intergovernmental partnership supports a wide array of critical efforts and observations with profound societal impacts. As such, having sustainable funding for these efforts is crucial to long-term success. With this goal of sustainable long-term funding in mind, the GEO Secretariat has intensified its resource mobilization effort since 2017, with additional focus of the Program Board and Executive Committee on this topic. The GEO Resource Mobilization Team was formed in 2018, and a pilot study was launched that involved GeoGlows, GeoPlanet, and GeoGlam, among others, laying groundwork and lessons learned for 2020, which resulted in a revamped strategy. Our goals for the strategy and what we want to achieve is to raise funds to scale up GEO Work Program activities, to create impact from the GEO Work Program, and to help GEO members to benefit from increased funding for projects involving them. As part of our ongoing activities, we are looking at various funding sources. Traditionally, for the GEO Trust Fund, this has included member states, but we are also looking at international development agencies, multilateral funding institutions, such as the World Bank, you'll be hearing from later on today, philanthropies, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Paul Allen Foundation, and the private sector. In addition to Amazon and Google, this has recently added Esri and Synergize in response to an open call, and you may also be familiar with Microsoft's support to GeoFund. In this effort, we are looking for creative solutions and assessing different levels of needs. Innovative funding sources are our main focus of this effort. We are also targeting higher level funding requests that can scale up projects rather than incremental support. This is especially true for the more developed activities. We are happy to be working with the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva on a master's project focused on evaluating and identifying sustainable funding models for Earth observations. This effort is led by two graduate students, Mi-Jian Kim and Simran Simha. The focus is on innovative options, really looking at new approaches that have not been previously explored at GEO and expanding our tools for mobilizing resources. At this point, the project kicked off in April. It will conclude in December, and the students are currently identifying existing and possible funding models and will be doing some deep dive case studies into GEO-specific applications. More results are to be shared at a later date on this project. Lessons learned from pilot efforts include that it is key to target your messaging, identify funding needs, and link with potential sources. The GEO Resource Mobilization Team can help you with that. It is critical to be clear and concise about the impact your project brings. Make sure to ask, who does it support? What can it deliver, and what is the value added? How will the end user benefit? Example, do you provide ecosystem services or life safety disaster prevention? You need to connect with your audience. Storytelling is also very important. As they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. Make sure to collect photos and personal messages from your communities, including testimonials to be used in your communications. To provide additional tips on message framing, there are key messages that most donors will be looking for, including how your proposed effort fits with their own organizational goals and their priorities for support. Be clear about what it is that your activity will deliver, and be sure to link your project and the support provided with deliverables that support given societal benefits. Make sure to ask, how will this tool help to support impacted communities or regions? Focus on what it will do rather than how it will do it. Remember that your audience may not be a technical expert, but will be focused on the benefits delivered and the end results provided. Make sure to tell a story, showcase that personal impact that your activity has. Develop those into communications tools, and the GEO Resource Mobilization Team is available to help you with this. As far as the process for engaging with the GEO Resource Mobilization Team, the technology readiness scale was adapted in order to assess readiness and stages for resource mobilization support. This will be applied to all activities requesting support in order so we can determine how to best engage with you and tailor our support for your activities. This will help us to develop message framing for you, work with you on budget development, and other tools. We will also be doing this work in coordination with the GEO Work Program coordinators. The technology readiness scale will be used to demonstrate the maturity of a research project and relative amount of additional development required to make this capability available from Earth observations and to scale up or advance to the next level. The TRL scale, which is based from 1 to 9, has 3 tiers. Tier 1 are those projects that have advanced applications with demonstrated societal benefits that can be shown to potential funders. Tier 2 are the mid-range of development efforts projects in the proof of concept stage that may need additional support. Tier 3 are efforts in the initial conceptual stage of development. Support here is needed to advance to the next level. Here, for resource mobilization, this is often where early development and messaging communication tools can be very important. Up to this point, with resource mobilization, we have been primarily focused on the higher level TRL projects where large-scale funding is needed to advance development. Moving forward with the 2020 strategy and next steps, we plan to continue engaging with work program activities who requested resource mobilization support on where the project is on the TRL scale and how we can best support them. We will be developing communication and outreach tools, assessing funding models and options for GEO. We will also continue to identify and target potential funders and link them with GEO applications. GEO Resource Mobilization Team is also planning in the near future to hold a GEO Resource Mobilization webinar focused on new developments and additional practical tips later in 2020. We thank you for your attention to this webinar. We hope that you find it useful, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great. Well, for the first presentation, I'd just like to say thank you, Justina, for providing that overview so that the community knows the work that we've been up to and that we were here to support them as they move forward with their resource mobilization tools and tactics. And I really appreciate the fact that we talked about the need to communicate the value, and that's something that I'm here and available to work with the GEO Work Program to help align that messaging. So now let's turn to our next presentation. It's going to be from Ian Jarvis talking about the GeoGlam resource mobilization journey.
I want to thank the organizers for offering the opportunity for GeoGlam to talk during this session. Resource mobilization, of course, is very important to GeoGlam. Moving right along, GeoGlam works to fight food insecurity and support markets, food commodity markets, by reinforcing the international community's capacity to produce and disseminate relevant, timely, and accurate projections of agricultural production at national, regional, and global scales. Now, some of the operational activities include the crop monitor for the Agricultural Monitoring Information System, which monitors the major food producing regions of the world, and this information is produced primarily for the markets and is responding to a G20 mandate that was given to us in 2009. We launched this crop monitor in 2013, and it's done monthly. Based on the success of this, we later in 2016 developed a crop monitor for early warning, and this is monthly. It has the same kind of look and feel as the Amos crop monitor, but it focuses on food insecure regions of the world and looks at different crop mix that are regionally important for food security. And then in recent years, we found that where we can have the greatest impact is working with countries to co-develop their own crop monitors. And what we found is that when the countries develop their own information, it's really trusted, seen as being authoritative, and quickly turned into policies and programs which have a positive impact on food security and livelihood. Now, in the last year or so, we've also been developing special reports based on areas of emerging concern, and this came about due to a request from the United Nations. And what they said was that the monthly reports were not often enough in these areas of emerging concern. So we've developed a series of reports, and you can find these at the cropmonitor.org website. And all this work is underlain by a strong foundation in research, including the Joint Experiments for Crop Assessment and Monitoring, which is a network of over 40 research sites around the world. So in terms of funding, it's a bit of a paradox. If you look at the GeoGlam structure, we have many projects in the GeoGlam universe, if you like, that both support institutional and national needs, but also feed into the global GeoGlam objectives. Now, these are coordinated by a very small secretariat, which includes a program director and some support from a couple people, about half a person year. So over 90% of these contributions are in kind. They come from research projects, operational implementation, capacity co-development, and so on. And this in-kind support has been very strong, continuous, and stable. But the funding for the glue that holds us together, or that's the GEOGLAM Secretariat, has been uncertain and has come and gone over time, and it generally is the type of funding that is difficult to find. So we have a small secretariat, as I said, one full-time position, in-kind support. We have a target of about $500,000 a year, and we haven't actually met that target yet. We run on a fairly thin budget. So the secretariat funding has been good and has come in the past from France, in the last couple of years from Germany. This year, we're looking at funding from Canada and the United Kingdom. But looking forward from 2020, the funding is unsustainable. In fact, we have no funding post-2020 at this time, so it's something we have to work towards. Now, the nature of this funding challenge really is that the GEOGLAM supporters and contributors are primarily national research institutions, academia, and international organizations. These organizations do not usually have direct access to international funding. The Secretariat support generally is not seen as a priority by them as well, because they're already supporting in a very significant way in-kind contributions. Also, the resource mobilization by the GEOGLAM Secretariat takes a lot of time and sustained effort, and as I said, we have a very small capacity. So it's really a way off of, do we do coordination or do we try to find the fundings to keep us going? We have to find that balance. But we are working to meet that challenge. In 2019, we hired a resource mobilization consultant, and kind of the central point of what he expressed was that using existing networks to identify and work with potential funding agencies was the best way to go. In particular, working with G20 nations that were kind of at the origin of GEOGLAM back in 2011, and primarily working on a bilateral basis, one-on-one with these partners, potential partners. So we began working with the GEO Resource Mobilization staff, Stephen Ramage, of course, last year as well, and that's been very positive. But I must say the COVID-19 is making this work and this outreach and engagement, particularly from the GEOGLAM perspective, very difficult, and has brought a lot of uncertainty as to whether or not we're going to be able to continue our operation into next year. So with that, I'll just say thank you and look forward to the discussion.
Great. Well, thanks very much to Ian, who provided an overview of kind of the approaches that they've taken. The one challenge that you note that COVID-19 will make funding more difficult, not only because there's less funds available, but also that face-to-face interaction that tends to happen at conferences and events just simply isn't happening. So this is something we may want to talk about when we get to the virtual discussion. So thanks again, Ian, for that. Our next presenter is Amos Kaboba, and he's going to talk about the GEO Land Degradation Neutrality Initiative. So off to Amos. Thanks.
The chair of the session, facilitators, colleague presenters, ladies and gentlemen, I trust very much that everyone is fine during this pandemic, and regardless of COVID-19 has come to stay with us, and we shall conquer and live with it. It is a privilege as co-chair of the GEO and on behalf of my colleague co-chairs, Enchi from Germany and Neil from Austria, to talk on the urgent to support and fund the GEO. I am Amos Kaboba, a senior lecturer and head of Department of the Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of Energy and Natural Resources in Ghana. The GEO-LDN initiative is by far a unique opportunity and stakeholder-driven initiative with a clear policy mandate from the USCCD. The USCCD is the sole legally binding international agreement linking environment and development to sustainable land management. And through this GEO-LDN will help national and local actors in all countries to use Earth observations to achieve the LDN. The initiative works in 3 working groups: the capacity development, data quality standards, and data analytics. By far, we have received funding from Germany, and we wish to really thank the German government for supporting the GEO-LDN. This funding was used to develop desktop questionnaire and decision trees, and the consultant was also able to prepare a technical note that will feed into the good practice guidance document, and the decision trees are going to be translated into the software trends.f. But there is still a lot of funding gap need, especially with the fact that if all these tools and knowledge is developed, there's a need to build capacity. There's a need to ensure that vulnerable countries, especially in developing countries, will be able to take up this, and the capacity development will be necessary. So far, the capacity development has not received any funding, and it will be important if partners could come in to really support this. The planning and decision-making processes to implement the SLM to reach the LDN is also another key activity by the working group 2 and 3 that needs to also be looked at. The prediction of areas susceptible to degradation and data linkages to improve climate models and land planning will also need some funding. We do not have any clear fundraising strategy, but we humbly solicit that secondment to support the GEO-LDN and working groups is highly encouraged, and we also welcome the commercial sector with high resolution satellite data to come to our aid to see how best this could help the LDN to meet its goals and objectives. We also wish to expand and encourage the participation of small island developing states, such as the Pacific Islands, and our Asia colleagues. We really welcome your participation. We know that there are discussions within the AOGO to support the GEO-LDN, and we really want that commitment to come as soon as possible. The issue of federated data analytics platform is also becoming key. Maybe this could be done through the GEO Knowledge Hub, but we want to see how this can be achieved within the LDN. Initiatives such as the Digital Earth Africa with the use of data keeps, so we will also welcome Digital Earth Africa to discuss and see how we could pilot some of the outcomes from the LDN by using the data keeps. One huge advantage of the LDN is feeding into the ongoing discussions as that has been verbalized by the UNCG country parties in the competition. So we want to really use this platform to encourage other countries other than Germany to support the competition by providing relevant funding. We are also aware that some member countries within the AfriGeo community are trying to support the LDN, and we really hope to receive these commitments as soon as possible. I am grateful for listening to my presentation, and on behalf of my co-chairs, I wish to thank the GEO Secretariat, Douglas, and the UNCCD Secretariat, Sarah, Baron, Shasha, and all the co-leads of the GEO-LDN who have supported the LDN thus far. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again to Amos for sharing those challenges with us and what your funding gaps are. I did note that you are specifically looking for funding for capacity building efforts, so that's something we may want to have a discussion about when the time comes. We can share resources and ideas for tapping into capacity building funds. So with that, let's keep moving. Pierre-Yves Letron from Mercator Ocean has his presentation ready, so let's watch it.
Good afternoon. So my name is Pierre-Yves Letron. I'm the Scientific Director of Mercator Ocean International, the Global Ocean Forecasting Center located in Toulouse, France, and also in charge of the implementation of the Copernicus Marine Service. So my presentation deals with mobilizing European resources to strengthen the GEO Blue Planet initiative. And I want to thank here my two co-authors, so Jan Rambert from the European Commission and Emil Ismail from NOAA, Executive Director of GEO Blue Planet. So first, a few words on the GEO Blue Planet initiative. So GEO Blue Planet is the ocean and coastal initiative of GEO. Its mission is to advance and exploit synergy among the operational programs devoted to ocean and coastal water, and to improve the engagement with users and enhancing the application and services that can be delivered from ocean observation. And finally, to raise awareness of the societal benefits of ocean observation. The GEO Blue Planet is organized in a series of working groups where really there is a brainstorming on different activities to be developed. And when it comes to practical implementation, this is done through a dedicated project. So you have here the list of projects that are today running as part of GEO Blue Planet, for instance, monitoring and forecasting of maritime hazard, global eutrophication monitoring, or sargassum monitoring. So in terms of resource history for GEO Blue Planet, so NOAA Satellite Oceanography and Climatology Division has been supporting the Secretariat since 2015. And the way to organize the international coordination around GEO Blue Planet has been done through workshops and symposiums that have been funded through proposal and support from participating organizations. For instance, the last GEO Blue Planet symposium was organized in Europe, in Toulouse, and was funded by Mercator Ocean on Copernicus Marine Service. So in terms of activity at European level, so first, as you know, the European Union is a driving force within GEO. The European Commission is a founding member, as one of the 4 co-chairs of GEO, and EU member states contribute actively to GEO. As far as the GEO Blue Planet initiative is concerned, so all activity deals with ocean observation, marine information, application and services. There are major European Commission contributions as part of the DG RTD research program, so H2020 Horizon Europe, but also the DG DFIS Copernicus program on its marine service and the DG Mare IMONET initiative. As an example of European activities that are relevant to the GEO Blue Planet activities, so all what has been done as part of this H2020 research program. This is a list of funded projects for the last 5 years dealing with ocean observation. So 120 projects has been funded with a budget above 400 million euros, and for a wide range of activity dealing from data, technology, new observation, for ocean health, for climate, for coastal application, and so on. This is already a major effort of European Commission. Okay. So with a growing portfolio of activities and interests in GEO Blue Planet, there is a need for increased resources, however, for the international coordination. So Mercator Ocean International has been recently tasked by the European Commission to strengthen the European Union contribution, visibility and influence in GEO Blue Planet. And to address this need, Mercator is setting up within its organization a GEO Blue Planet European office. And the office will be in place next October, and it will monitor and promote European programs, projects and activities with relevance to GEO Blue Planet. So, of course, Copernicus services, Horizon Europe and H2020, European Research Infrastructure, IMONET. We also monitor, promote GEO Blue Planet activities which are beneficial for Europe, scrutinize the GEO Blue Planet implementation plan on possible European activities, and introduce new European relevant thematic activities, and of course provide technical support to the international GEO Blue Planet activities. I think this is a very good example of resource mobilization to improve the coordination and support the development of a major initiative of GEO. And key factor of success was the alignment of priorities between European and international efforts to better link ocean observation to societal needs. It was also related to a shared recognition of the critical importance and relevance of GEO Planet initiative. Thank you.
Oh, merci beaucoup, Pierre-Yves. One thing that I note that I think will be really relevant for GEO Work Program is what you mentioned there at the very end, which is aligning the priorities and the deliverables of your project with your funder, sharing recognition, finding pilot funding and scaling it up. So we really appreciate that really kind of good actionable advice that other work program activities really can benefit from. So thanks again. So we're going to move on. Our next speaker doesn't need a big introduction. His name is Harsh. He's from the World Bank, and he's been working closely with GeoGlows on some of their funding needs. So let's turn to Harsh now. Thanks.
Hello everybody, and thank you to GEO for inviting me to be part of this session. My name is Adam Lewis and I'm leading the effort to establish Digital Earth Africa, or DE Africa. My background is in natural resources, environmental science and spatial information, including remote sensing. Before Digital Earth Africa, I was leading the Earth and Marine Observation Area in Geoscience Australia. Over a period of some years, I'd led the development of the Open Data Cube, which was previously known as the Australian Geoscience Data Cube, and before that we didn't have a name, although we were leaning towards the Data Cubey thingy. But prior to my career in Geoscience Australia, which is a provider of scientific data, I worked in resource management agencies whose focus was using data to make better decisions. For example, I spent 4 years on the Great Barrier Reef, including using Landsat imagery to remap the reefs and redesign the protected areas. I started my career as a forester in the tall forests of southeastern Australia. The funding we've got for Digital Earth Africa is from these sources. So DE Africa was funded in early 2019 by two programs, the Leona M and Harry B Helmsley Charitable Trust and the Australian Government Aid Program, AusAid, under the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, or DFAT. Helmsley provided $10 million US, and DFAT matched that with 10 million Australian dollars. The funding is over a 3-year period to establish DE Africa as an ongoing capability for Africa. I'd like to note also that we have highly valuable support from others, including Esri, Amazon, Servier, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Data Development, the World Economic Forum, and GEO, of course. However, I'm treating those as out of scope for this discussion. And for this session, I've been asked to reflect on the factors that appear to have led to those funding commitments. So with the benefit of hindsight and a bit of imagination, I'm going to try to unpack those factors. The first is that we had a clear value proposition and an identifiable product. It's well known and accepted that satellite imagery holds a wealth of information that's relevant to decision making for land, water, coasts, forests, cities, and so on, and that in Africa, that information is desperately needed to allow countries to make better decisions, to underpin international agendas such as Africa 2063 and the UN SDGs, but also to empower citizens and to fuel innovation and research. And in recent years, the absolute amount of this information has grown exponentially with free and open coverage of the globe through Landsat and Copernicus. Equally evident, only a tiny fraction of the information in these satellite images is able to be extracted and applied in practice. There's clearly an immense unrealized potential to do better with satellite data. But we brought DE Africa as a high-level architecture to unlock the potential of satellite images, not just locally or for research purposes, but for the entire continent and for government, academia, the private sector, NGOs, all of Africa at full resolution. In short, we had a problem, there is a problem, and we had a solution. The second crucial ingredient is communication, persistent communication and advocacy. Ideas really don't speak for themselves. Even the very best ideas need to have a champion or they will wither on the vine. We had the good fortune to have Stuart Minchin in particular as a tireless proponent for the Data Cube as a concept. And I'll point out also Brian Kilo as a more technical advocate, demonstrating the concept in global contexts and taking up the banner under CEOS. The simple rule for communication is that more is better. Each communication creates an opportunity for someone to get the idea, to pass it along or act on it, or to open a door to a conversation with a key person and a potential funder. All the better if that person has already been hearing the idea from their peers. So the message has to be right, but after that, it's a numbers game. The more the merrier. The idea has to be out there. Linked to that, I think, is the idea of endorsement. The idea of the data cube was already widely endorsed by the time our funders heard of it. The World Geospatial Forum in 2016 awarded the Australian Geoscience Data Cube, as it was then called, as the Content Platform of the Year. The Australian government had recently funded Digital Earth Australia. 20 Open Data Cube demonstrators globally, sponsored by CEOS, and 5 of those were in African countries. So the importance of endorsement is that for any of us, endorsement by a third party gives a sense that an idea is sound and potentially a reasonable investment. I think the next factor for us was that there's a reasonable expectation of delivery, and that what we're putting on the table could in fact be delivered in practice. For us, we were able to point to some critical elements. A phase 1 study that really made the case and laid out the implementation approach, pulled together by Aditya Agrawal. Digital Earth Australia itself already existed as a technical big brother that we could use as a springboard. The 5 countries of the Africa Regional Data Cube had already demonstrated there was an appetite in Africa, in African countries for a data cube approach, and a highly engaged steering committee guiding that phase 1 had demonstrated that was leadership in Africa that was prepared to take this forward. But at this stage, I'll stop there and be happy to take more in questions. But those are the key things that I think in reflection, helped us to get funding for DE Africa at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And I just want to apologize for everybody for the mix-up of the order of videos. So you just heard from Adam Lewis from Digital Earth Africa, and he spoke about some of the approaches that they use, really strengthening their communications, their advocacy, and their outreach. So I think we stand to learn a bit more from him, and we'll have a discussion with Adam later. So let's now turn to the presentation from Harsh. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, good evening to all of you who have joined. And what I'm going to try and do today is to first introduce some of the work that we are doing at the World Bank, which is of relevance to GeoGlows, and talk a bit more also about some of the resources that we've put together to try and support some of the activities here. My name is Harsh, and I'm a global lead for something called disruptive technology at the World Bank, and I've been here for about 24 years working on environment, water, and other natural resources, and especially related to the use of new technologies in a lot of the work. And I also co-lead our hydroinformatics group at the World Bank. As you know, the world faces a lot of different development challenges, and the world has come together to try and capture these as part of sustainable development goals going ahead. A lot of these challenges take the form of social aspects, where many people in the world today still live in ways that nobody should. And also environmental aspects, where a lot of our natural resources are under threat from many different aspects. And also on trying to look at economic goals that we are trying to support countries on, to try and look at both improving growth as well as making sure that it is shared prosperity in terms of the work that's happening, and to make sure that the infrastructure and other aspects are well taken care of in terms of these areas. So a lot of these will stretch our resources to try and make sure that we can help cater to all of these different triple bottom line aspects in terms of going ahead. For this work, one of the new angles that we are looking at is the use of new types of technologies. Some of these could be technologies related to disrupting decision making by relooking at the data value chain, which we'll come to in a second, where you're looking at new ways of collecting data from in situ sensors or crowdsourcing from the ground, as well as earth observation, and also look at new ways of analyzing and managing this data using more and more open data approaches, so that this could be used to help support understanding and decision making in this regard. Also, new ways of disrupting production or operation systems using new technologies on automation, robotics, 3D printing, new materials, and so on, as well as disrupting interaction among people using more of the platforms that are emerging to connect people together in new ways. So if we look at the first one, which is most relevant here, if we look at one particular problem in terms of how people deal with floods, usually we start at the data level and see what data there is to try and support that activity. But it's best to start at what decisions you're trying to support in terms of helping people better cope with floods. To do that, we need better knowledge on when the floods are coming and knowledge about what to do once you get the warnings about that. And to do this, we need better weather forecasts, hydrologic forecasts, and flood inundation forecasts. And those depend on a lot of data, both historical, from Earth observation, top-down type, or bottom-up gauge information, and surveys such as DEMs and so on, and ways of converting things from one level to the other so that you can help to make that decision better over time. One example in this regard is some of the work that's trying to be done on water information systems. These usually include trying to pull together new kinds of data sets related to what you can measure on the ground, whether from sensors, a new range that is improving every day, as well as new ways of manual monitoring and crowdsourcing of information, as well as a whole new range of Earth observation that you've been discussing all week relating to new approaches and technologies and possibilities there. Linking it up with data rescue, because a lot of data, unfortunately, is like those piles of paper that you see there from real places that we visited in the recent past even, where the only digestion of information there is probably from termites. And to try and link that and make it more modern with GIS and other data sets, as well as new ways of managing the data and linking up with analytical tools, so that it could be accessed in different platforms, whether virtual or physical platforms, to alert different stakeholders and help them manage things better. And this is where a range of new technologies, especially some of the new big data, machine learning, and so on, can become really useful in terms of getting to the next level of integrating all of these to help make decisions around the world. One area where we've been working with GEO Glows is to try and help countries around the world to access what's probably the jewel in the crown in GEO Glows currently, which is some of the work which has been done by BYU, Aquaveo, and a whole range of other partners on looking at stream flow forecasts or stream flow estimation, where if we look, for example, in this case, at the beginning of the Blue Nile in just south of Ethiopia's biggest lake, Lake Tana, you have ways now of being able to look at any of the stream flow segments and looking at all the 51 models of the ECMWF and seeing what that means in terms of flow forecasts for the next 15 days or historical data for the last 40 years, which you can analyze and also use to do bias correction so that you can better estimate a lot of the data sets that you're looking at for decision support. So what we've been doing in terms of our support on GEO Glows is participating right from the beginning in some of the GEO Glows meetings, conferences, discussions, helping support generation of new ideas in this regard, learning from everybody to try and see how we could educate our own staff as well as our clients on some of these tools, and to also support this with resources. For example, we've been doing a lot in terms of some of the global efforts, as well as linking up with our tools like Spatial Agent and so on, as well as deep dives in particular parts of the world, such as Ethiopia, West Africa, Somalia, and now we are looking at the Arab world and so on. And some of these are also supporting new additions to these stream flow forecasts and linking it up also with better linking it with the ECMWF resources that are there. So we've been leveraging a lot of resources, both from the bank's own resources, as well as client resources, for example, in the case of a lot of countries to help organize meetings through project resources or using reimbursable advisory services, and so on to finance some of these. And to link up also with some of our internal and external partnerships for these types of products and services, which includes a lot of the hydroinformatics and watersheds and other groups within the bank, as well as some of one of the help desks that I run, for example, called the Disruptive Kids Help Desk, on knowledge, information, and data services, which can help teams better on these areas, and linking up with the Open Learning Campus on some of the training aspects of this, which we wanted to deepen in the future. So looking ahead, a suggestion for all of you is to see if we can make sure that a lot of these basic products and services are still free and low cost so that they can benefit even the poorer countries and poorer stakeholders that we work with, and don't remain something that only the rich can afford. And also to see if we can do this through more and more using open APIs, open source platforms, and so on, so that these can be automated and used even where there's a lot of capacity challenges in most of the places where we work. That's a main fact. And to try and see how to reduce costs by doing more virtual or online knowledge packaging or training and so on. And also moving from retail level work, which has been happening, to look at one base in one country, to more wholesale level global approaches like the GEO is trying to promote. And also to see if we can leverage more resources so that we can leverage different institutions to help look at how they can support these activities with their work and better integrate it into a lot of these activities that they're already doing. And the unfortunate COVID situation we are in is the only silver lining is that it's also served as an accelerant to encourage everyone to start thinking about some of these newer technologies. And many of the bank staff and clients are interested to see how we can better leverage a lot of these resources going ahead to go to more remote kind of data services that people can count on for a lot of the work that they're doing. And the final point is that we really should be seeing how we can make these even better in the future, leveraging a lot of these EO services, adding more machine learning and other aspects so that we can help a lot of the clients around the world that we work with. And we look forward to continuing a lot of our collaboration with you going ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Harsh, for a great presentation there. A few takeaways for me is really the power of partnerships, partnering with an organization to really drive something forward and to bring benefits to users. And as you said, we really want to deliver these benefits to the people who need them most. And indeed, that would help us achieve the GEO vision of improving the world through Earth observation. So thank you again for that. So that kind of draws us to a close for the first 6 presentations of this webinar. They've really focused on the challenges and successes in the GEO work program. And I want to thank again everybody for their great presentations. Continue to put your questions into Slido. We are getting quite a few. I want to take the opportunity to answer one of them. It's from Dr. Leah Shanley, and she's asking, can she get the contact information for the speakers? Well, absolutely. All of our presentations are on the website, so we encourage you to see them there. And this video will also be uploaded afterwards, so you can definitely contact us. So shifting gears a little bit, I'd like to now introduce our invited expert from the International Labour Organization. Casper's going to talk us through a little bit more broadly his experience with international organizations and some of the funding gaps and challenges related to sustainable development. So without any more delay, let's go to our final presentation of this session. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Casper. Many years ago I was born in Denmark, but very early on decided I wanted to work in international development. So as a young man I set out into the development world with my wife Aino and our newborn daughter Clara, take up a job for the ILO in Kathmandu, Nepal. Since then, I haven't looked back. I've been so fortunate to continue the work for the International Labour Organization. And I've also had the opportunity in the past 20 years of working for the International Finance Corporation, which is a part of the World Bank. Much of my work has been around partnerships and resource mobilization at the international level, and that's what I'm here to share some reflections about today. I should say that for 9 years I worked in the ILO's resource mobilization function, which is a function where we mobilize around 350 to 450 million in voluntary funding every year. When I was working for the International Finance Operation, we mobilized corporately around the same amount, and for the service that I was in, some $150 million every year in funding from many different donors, both public and private. More than that, I have been participating in all international conferences concerning financing for development and conferences concerning sustainable development. And that's essentially what I'll be drawing on in this little piece of reflections that I would like to share with you and further discuss with you today. So, first of all, financing flows have changed, and they've changed dramatically since I started and since what we call official development assistance began. Just consider this. In 1941, there were 19 international organizations. Today, there are more than 350 such organizations, all wanting to contribute to international development. Back then, right after the war, the development assistance and financing from the newly created European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the World Bank Group by far topped all other financing for developing countries. That has completely changed today, because what we have seen is a remarkable growth of the private sector in foreign direct investments, and those flows from sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, investors, private companies, private equity, banks lending have long ago overtaken all of the lending by the World Bank Group and all the international financial institutions combined. It is what has also surpassed official development assistance is debt relief, is remittances from migrants, and illicit flows. So if you add all of these charts, all of these flows onto a chart, official development assistance is just a small little wedge at the bottom. That, of course, raises an almost existential question. What good does official development assistance do? And the holy grail, if I may use that term, of all donor agencies and development cooperation agencies in this world has become, how can we use development assistance resources as a catalyst to mobilize and draw on and bring in, crowd in all of these other financial flows for the good of sustainable development. And what has happened at the same time is that the world has changed. So when I grew up, it was, to be blunt, relatively simple. Half of the world countries were poor, half of the world countries were rich and gave development assistance. Now the profile of poverty and the global development challenges have changed completely. now we find pockets of poverty within large middle-income countries that themselves have considerable resources that they can use and draw on to address the problem. So again, the billion-dollar question, as it has been framed, is how can development assistance be used in a catalytic way to free up those resources that these countries in which the majority of the world's poor live can be used for sustainable development. Now, the Financing for Development agenda has been established through a number of major international conferences of financing for development starting in Monterrey. And the last one was in Addis Ababa in 2015, the same year that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted. The Addis Ababa Agenda calls for a much more comprehensive look at how sustainable development is financed. And the specific action areas of this agenda include, first of all, mobilizing domestic public resources. Those resources I mentioned before that middle-income countries, high-income countries, and even low-income countries have access to their own national budgets. The second action area is how to mobilize domestic and international private business and finance. This is the question about how the private sector can be a force for good. And with the private sector, I mean broadly, not just companies, but also investment funds, pension funds, and so on. The third area is international development cooperation. Those donors or development partners, as they now want to be called, who for decades have financed international development and continue to do so. The fourth action area includes international trade as an engine for development. And it's concerning to see how in recent years there's been a backlash against globalization and free trade when we know how free trade has helped lift millions out of poverty. The next action area is debt and debt sustainability. There's been a long focus, particularly in the last 3 decades, on debt relief and how debt relief is an important part of sustainable development because it will free up resources that countries otherwise had to pay in servicing their debt and devote that to development, sustainable development. The sixth area is a vaguer one, but perhaps the most important one, which is called addressing systemic issues. We don't live in an equal world, as is no surprise to you. It's beset by geopolitics, barriers to trade, barriers to technological transfer. And if those systemic issues are not addressed, it'll be very difficult to see how the world can achieve the sustainable development goals. Finally, and I think it's a very important part of the debate, is science, technology, innovation, and capacity building. So as you can see, it's a very broad agenda, and I encourage us to heed that in our discussion afterwards about how we can mobilize resources in a more comprehensive and strategic way. There are some other things that have happened which started with the Paris Declaration for Aid Effectiveness. It essentially said that the days of tied donor support for specific projects is over. That these projects where the donors say to a country or to an organization, I will give you so much, but you have to purchase the goods or the technology in my country and you have to hire compatriots for the project posts. Those days should be over. And it said that development cooperation aid to be effective, was an effectiveness agenda, have to be used and coordinated in much, much better ways. It was about that time that the whole notion of direct budget support began. And in countries like Tanzania, the most advanced donors actually, instead of funding projects or programs, decided to give extra budgetary support directly to the budgets of these countries. But of course, they demanded a very strong auditing and oversight of how these resources were spent. Around the same time, the UN started to think about, well, how do we move away from tens of thousands of fragmented projects all over the globe and move towards a more strategic and coherent approach. And the UN developed what is called the multi-donor or multi-partner trust funds, and has actively begun asking donors that finance the UN to put a lot of resources into such basket funds or trust funds where the funding of the donors in the past gave to individual projects could be mingled, shared, and leveraged for a broader impact and better results. This will continue, I have no doubt, but I'm concerned because donors are now no longer talking about partnership and effectiveness. They're talking about smart partnerships. And by that they really mean you are smart if we do a partnership with you and you hire our nationals or you use our resources. So I'm afraid these things go around in cycles. That to some extent we are back in the 50s and 60s where everything was tied aid for project financing. There seems to be a trend going that way. And that's worrying because we have 1 decade, 10 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal. The Secretary General has launched the Decade of Action, and 10 years is all we have. And ODA is stagnating. Trade is projected to drop by between 10 and 30% because of COVID. In fact, COVID is compounding the challenges that we are faced with because it puts a brake and has put a brake on economic growth. So there are less domestic resources. And with less domestic resources, with businesses not getting the returns that they normally get, holding back investment decisions, with ODA stagnating, with free trade unraveling, with debt growing, we're in a very, very difficult situation. So what to do? Well, first of all, I would like to hear your views. We've already heard from other presenters, and I'm sure we'll have an excellent debate. But for me, it starts with a vision and then with a strategy. So in the ILO, we deliberately wanted to move away from project-by-project financing. And we didn't stop it outright, but each time we had conversations with donors, we tried to move them towards at least a more programmatic approach. And we tried to convince donors to enter into multi-year, longer-term funding partnerships with us. And we also created a new facility for untied, non-earmarked funding into what we call an extra budgetary financing facility, where the ILO, where we could decide how to allocate these resources for the goals and priorities that were most important for our organization. Then we continued to develop our offering and to demonstrate our continued relevance to attaining the most important goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we put an emphasis on 2 things, innovation and communication, which is absolutely key. But at the end of the day, fundraising or resource mobilization is an art and not a science. It's about the human touch. And as with any relationship or partnership, it's about a deep respect for the representatives of the donors and development partners we work with. And building networks and those conversations and on that trust and experience over time, we have been able to expand our partnership base, to have meaningful discussions with our donors when they're scraping the bottom of their piggy banks and when our budgets are hurting. And with those human relationships, that joint vision, the innovation and a strategic approach can go a long, long, long way. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to our discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Casper, for providing not only a historical look, but some really actionable things that we need to look at if we do, in fact, want to target, this untied multi-year funds. We should be looking at maybe a multi-donor trust fund or others. So I really appreciate that. And I do see some questions coming in that we will direct to you. So at this point, could I please ask all my presenters to turn on their videos, because we are about to start the live portion of the session. And I see that we have 17 questions that have come in via Slido, and we have 25 minutes. So I am going to use the democratic process here and use the questions that have been upvoted the most, and we will go through the questions that way. So the first question is from Nancy Serby. Thanks, Nancy. What perspective can speakers provide regarding funding for global versus regional versus national activities? How can we adjust our approaches to what funders and countries want at these various levels? That's an open question. If anybody wants to join, just raise your hand. Or yeah, Harsh, please go ahead.
Okay, no, thanks, Nancy. And thanks for all your work at NASA. In terms of this particular aspect, it's something that everyone is struggling with. At the World Bank, for example, we are going through yet another small reorganization in another couple of weeks, precisely on this, where there's a little bit of a divide now between what can be done at the global level and what can be done more at the regional level. So we are trying to realign ourselves a little bit in that area. We count mainly to fund these kinds of activities. They usually come from two types of sources. One is bank internal sources for bank activities, and the other is the resources that we provide countries for their projects. On the internal side, these can be both global, national, at country level, at all scales. But I think more and more I believe that a lot of resources need to be focused on the more wholesale approaches that can be provided through more global services and platforms for data analytics, knowledge learning as much as possible. And but there's a lot of resources available at the country level, especially for projects that are done in countries through, for example, in our case, a range of different instruments that are coming up now, whether it be Program for Results or whether looking at development policy operations or real investment projects that are being done at different levels, financed by IDA, IBRD, different kind of pots of resources that we have, and increasingly a lot of trust fund resources which also go across all levels. So these are things where probably a combination of these will need to be done. For example, if it's a training event that we organize globally and we invite a lot of the GEO folks and partners to come in and present, so there'll be some expenses, let's say, on arranging these, but a lot of these will also be at the client level to try and organize themselves to participate and so on, especially in this new virtual world. So those are things which are usually financed through the projects that we help support or through their own financing through governments and so on. So it's a way of trying to see how we can leverage all of these resources to try and do the better documentation, better training, and better kind of awareness, because most people don't know what's possible, both within the bank as well as in our clients. So that's the first order of business, is just to let people know what to do about it and then customize it for their own work.
Great. Did anybody else want to provide any perspective on how they've approached national projects versus regional? Okay, and just to know,
if I may,
please.
Just a quick one, if I may, Thea. One of the first things we did when I took over the resource mobilization function in the ILO was to find out inside our organization what percentage of donor funds do we get through country representations of donors, and what do we get through global partnerships. And we were surprised to see that it was almost 40% of funding flowing to our projects from the local level. We send out questionnaires to all our country colleagues, asking to understand how these funds have come about to learn new projects. And by doing that, involving them in the thinking process, we came up with some training modules, information modules to country directors of the ILO and country staff, where they could learn from each other's best practices in reaching out to donors at the country level. The issue with a lot of country level funding is that it's very often tied to one project and not this broader partnership approach. But certainly a low-hanging fruit is to find out internally in the GEO network what works when you mobilize resources at the country level. Who are the donors that have decentralized funding authority? For instance, the EU has up to 8 million in decentralized funding authorities. Other countries have no way of funding locally. And then how to go about it. So I'm happy to share with you afterwards, Thea and your group, some concrete steps and the training modules we developed, because they could apply to your organization as well.
Thank you for that offer, Casper. I think we'll definitely connect after this session and make those resources available across the GEO Work program. So thanks. So our next question that has been upvoted, it comes from Lawrence Friedel. Thanks, Lawrence. So I may direct this to Justina, but please, everybody, feel free to jump in. So what are some common metrics and performance standards that foundations will expect GEO to adhere to? Do we have internal mechanisms when those funds arrive?
So thank you for that, Lawrence. I think it's an excellent question. I think in terms of common variables, we're exploring that within the GEO resource mobilization team, trying to provide guidelines across different donor sources and to really seek out some of those common elements. But I think what we're seeing so far is, and even what we heard from the presenters here, is that deliverability is a big factor, being able to show the clear and concise value of the product you have and the ability to deliver on that product, ability to align with the donor's vision, the kind of long-term mission and goals, the ability to perhaps scale that up to be a global capability, to provide also a sound team and structure. So when you're transferring funds, that's something that the GEO Secretariat can help with. Projects can be earmarked, not just for, the trust fund, but they can be earmarked for specific projects, providing more of that structure and helping to disseminate to different partners. But I think there are some clear common elements, definitely in terms of communicating with donors and really showing the innovation of the capabilities we have, and that how that really provides benefits, delivered on the ground. With that said, I think we are still working on developing, a broader guidelines across the GEO community to really, pick out certain factors depending on the donor base. And so that's definitely something else that the GEO resource mobilization team is helping with.
Great, thanks. And then I would just add to the second part, do we have a mechanism in place when funds arrive? We do have the GEO Trust Fund where we're able to accept funding through that. I'm wondering, are there any other mechanisms through which we can receive funding, Justina? Through foundations?
Through the foundations, not well. Right now for GEO, I believe it is the Trust Fund. I think some of that will have to be case by case determined also in terms of who is getting the funding. GEO is involved with a lot of broad partnerships, and so sometimes it depends on where the funding is going as well. But that is something we can work with the programs themselves. And I think as we, develop all of these capabilities, we'll be able to provide, those answers as well and precedent. But I think right now, definitely the clearest way is, like you just mentioned, the ability to send funds through the GEO Secretariat as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So we have a question from Vincent. I apologize if I say this wrong. Gabaglio from UMetSat. So how important is it to bring forward the technological aspects of the work when you're discussing with donors on resource mobilization? How technical should one be when we're pitching our products to funders? Maybe could I ask Ian to talk a little bit about this?
Sure, that's a good question. I think the key thing is technology comes last, I think. I think it's all about the impact. You need to bring the impact forward. Once they understand that, then you can explore some of the more technical aspects of what you're trying to deliver. So often we try to address these things because we're all technical people. We try to address it from our perspective, but you really have to flip that around, change the message, and try to think of it, the situation from the perspective of the people you're working with for support.
Great. And does anybody else feel? Yeah. Hey, Amos.
Yes. So thank you very much. I think that's a very good question. And following the example of the African Regional Data Cube, which is now the Digital Health Africa, I think being in that team for Ghana, what I got to realize was that the ministers who were in charge for reporting for the SDGs were really happy to really see all this possibility of maps that tell the story, because from getting the maps and not a huge 1,000-page report that they have to go through, that they're able to make decisions in quite a good time, and transparency in understanding what is happening in space and time was really very important. So I think it's more about how we communicate in a simple language that shows the impact, so that we can be able to get buy-in from this government.
Well, I think our panelists agree. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. I think we all agree that we really need to tell the story of whose lives we're impacting. Harsh, did you want to jump in here as well?
Yeah, very quickly. You'll need to cater to many different audiences, right? Even if it's donors. And for example, we are both a donor and a recipient because we are funded by all the many trust funds. So in some ways, we have to play both sides of this angle as well. So the thing here is, I think it's very key, as Ian Amos said, to focus on the impacts in there. But also it's important to have a good technological base for this work, because often one of the biggest challenges that I have seen is that we end up doing a lot of retail level work, right? Where you spend a lot of money trying to do one very clever system for one little watershed or one city or someplace. And if you had spent like 5% more resources, you could have done a global version, or you could make something that's useful for many other people along the way. So these are things which would be really useful to try and see how we can use some of the technology aspects in terms of open APIs and having services and other things, which could also enter some of the conversations that are there, especially, and they could come in stage bay at different levels, to see if we can ask the fundamental question, not to be too swayed by what donor requirements are, but to look, even while discussing everywhere, at impact, in the sense of to see how this can benefit the most number of people, especially those who usually cannot afford such technologies. And today, with a lot of the automation that's there, it's changed the nature of even capacity building a lot, because you don't need to make everybody a remote sensing GIS and programming expert, but to use such a system, so that it could make a big difference to everybody on the development side.
And in your experience, Adam, with Digital Earth Africa, how have you walked the balance between selling the technological solution versus the impact of the solution?
A good question. Thanks, Tara. I think the impact is what it's all about, but sometimes the technology can be an important part of the story, and an important part of what the offer is you're putting on the table. We would never have expected the Helmsley Trust to fund Earth observation. That's not what they do. They fund medicine in specific countries. But when Walter Panzias saw a presentation by a third party about Digital Earth Africa, he got interested. We actually went and asked them why they invested. And to quote him, he said, "We invested in Digital Earth Africa because we believe it will be transformative for every country across Africa and for every person in Africa." So they could see and were prepared to buy into a big vision, but the big vision's underpinned by a technology idea that was new.
Great. And I mean, this is a really important topic, and it's one that's come up a lot in GEO. So I think this is a really good debate to have. So does anybody else want to comment on that, or shall I move on to another question?
I just have one quick comment, Tia, which is just to mention that a lot of the work that the GEO Resource Mobilization team is doing and trying to support GEO is to help them with crafting this kind of message framing and to kind of maybe bridge that balance between the impact versus the technical aspects. And so we've done that for a couple of different efforts, and I think that that is one of the tools that the resource mobilization team can support the community with.
Great, thanks for that. So I'm going to pose a question that came in. It's directly for Pierre-Yves. So this comes from Stephen Ramage. And it's a question specifically about your presentation. And it's of that 400 million euros that you mentioned in the EC funding for oceans, how much has been assigned or attributed to the Blue Planet or other aspects of GEO?
Yes, so actually this figure was more a general figure of the European Commission H2020 funding for ocean observation and ocean activities. And as part of this funding on this large number of projects, more than 100 projects, several of them were specifically mentioning GEO Blue Planet. I mean, Atlantos, for instance, which was a large project dealing with the Atlantic Ocean, was referring to GEO Blue Planet. So it's really directly an answer of the European Commission to GEO Blue Planet activity. So this just one example of really targeted funding from the European Commission for a GEO initiative. And there are other ones, of course. If you look at the Copernicus Marine Service, and many of the activities that are funded by European Commission are actually answering some of the question or priorities of GEO Blue Planet. And maybe last point to mention on what I presented on this funding for the European Office for GEO Blue Planet. That's again a new instrument within the European Commission, which is the FPI, Foreign Policy Instrument, which is a useful instrument of the European Commission to foster and help international coordination and also support the European contribution. So there are really direct contribution of European Commission for activity relevant to this international GEO Blue Planet initiative.
Great, thank you. And I think it's something Justine and I have talked about, is really finding a funder who is very aligned with the project priorities. That is definitely a winning formula. So thank you. I have a question. It's a broad question. I think anybody can jump in on this one. The question comes from Imran Saluji. How important is the co-design and co-production process? So how important is it as a criteria from funding agencies? Is this something that they're looking at, that the project has been co-designed, and how can we address that? Harsh, yep, come on in.
Very quickly, some of the angles we may want to look at here is there will be specific ways in which working with prospective clients can really help the development. One is, of course, for the financing aspect, but also maybe the rollout, maybe there's immediate needs of projects someplace that can have a bunch of thirsty horses already set up in different places to absorb a lot of work that's being done. So a lot of these things could be in terms of phasing and rollout or testing with local data and other things that are there. That's what we've done, for example, in the GeoGlows case, working with Angelica Gutierrez and Brad and Jim Nelson and others. One of the key things is to see where around the world there's both a need, and we've already put together some client interest in this kind of area. For example, in Ethiopia, or next week we are working with the people in Somalia, where we've just managed to get, in a difficult situation, a lot of the hydrologists together to try and be a sounding board for these kind of things and make it part of a larger training program that we've had. So a lot of these things could be done in partnership, mainly to try and make sure that you're not just throwing some great resource over the wall and hope someone catches it, but to try and make it more targeted so that you know that people will be starting to use it, and also provide feedback to improve these services, because a lot of the EO services would require better data for calibration, validation, or training purposes, and so on. So that's where a lot of organizations maybe can get together to help make these kind of things more accessible and in the public domain. And also maybe we can find a way to work across a lot of the GEO initiatives to even create kind of a virtual help desk of sorts for a lot of the countries to try and support activities. It won't be onerous for any one person, but together as a group, it can help provide a lot of feedback to people as they require it in terms of co-design work.
Great, that's a great perspective.
If I may,
Oh, I just saw, I see a hand up from Pierre-Yves and also from Adam, but Pierre-Yves, I saw you first, so go ahead, and then we'll go to Adam.
Yes. Okay, yes, maybe very briefly, I think this issue of co-design, co-production, I think is a very important one, and it's really coming also to what you mentioned also in the introduction of this session, is to make sure that when the work programs are developed, there is really this co-design with a different funding agency, because they will be more inclined afterwards to co-fund the initiative if they are really feel confident that what is developed, proposed, corresponds to their needs. That's, I think for me, it's a very important aspect.
Yeah. Great point, thanks.
I think, sorry to cut in there. I think Harsh made a good point there. And I agree with what's been said. For Digital Earth Africa, this is fundamental because we see that success lies not in us doing things for countries or for Africa, but doing things with and establishing something that will be owned by the countries and institutions in Africa. And if we don't do that, we haven't really succeeded. So, and that will never happen without co-design. And so my view is that funders should be looking very much toward whether there's a really robust co-design process in place, because any of us know that if information's handed to any of us as technologists, we're not going to use it unless we've had a hand in developing it. It's a bit of human nature in there.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's crucial for the buy-in, but also, as Harsh said, to understand the user and their needs. So I think the co-design process is something that we really focus on in GEO. We could focus on even more so as it relates to capacity development. Casper, do you have that? Yeah, I think everybody has a say in this. So maybe I'll go to Amos and then Casper, talking about co-design and co-production.
Yes. Just as the others were talking, I was nodding my head because, especially as from developing countries, we see the co-design, and let me even put it ethically, as a way to give the receiver of the service or the product or the technology that they also have something to offer at the end of the day. So it comes in with the willingness to understand what is going on and to also bring the input. And in the end, when the project is even ended, the people who are the users will continuously find their own resources to ensure that this is continued. So I think this is really fundamental and must be recognized and must be kept. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I wanted to abuse my privilege of being here today to ask a question to you, actually, and the fellow panelists. And the question is, would it be possible to imagine a day where GEO would assist governments in monitoring the effectiveness of their national development strategies or subsets thereof, so that, in other words, the GEO observation technologies that you're promoting, the sharing of, the implementation of, is used by an important country to measure its progress in its own national development plan to attain the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, that's the story that development partners would buy into. And I think it's possible. Problem is you have competitors. There's already the United Nations Pulse initiative, but I'm just would love your feedback on that, because that's something that I think could bring all of the different excellent projects, programs, and experiences on this webinar together behind a common goal. Over.
Well, Casper, I just want to say I think you've come up with the first topic for our webinar series. that will follow. I think this is something that needs to be explored. I know that there is a lot of work being done across the GEO work program to support countries with some SDG monitoring. So I know this work is going on. Perhaps we need to package it and to really tell that story. Harsh, I'll give you the last word. We have 1 minute left before we turn to the closing session. So close us out, Harsh.
All right. Really fast then. No, I think just a quick point on that. I don't think there's any competition because we're all playing on the same side here. The key thing here is, I think, to make sure that whatever is developed to help these kind of efforts is global and is free, right? Those are the key things so that more and more people can then start using it. There may be resources required to produce these things. There may be resources required to host these and make sure it's available and to train people in using these. But a lot of these will also keep evolving over time. And there's amazing efforts from everybody that's already been done in this regard. So it'll be great to improve awareness of these and use it for both, not just monitoring, but also helping plan new investments and evaluate investments as we go as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining and, for the lively discussion. I will be sending you the questions that couldn't be answered today. They will be answered within the next week via writing. So we'll work together to get those answers out to the GEO community. And with that, I would like to invite everybody to stay on the line because we are going to go straight into our closing session. So thanks, everybody, again for this really great talk. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.